think about it much or not. So when you grow up, not that you're not growing now, but when you get older, I'll put it that way, and you start making the decisions about what's going to happen in your communities, hopefully you'll remember that we have to consider when we make decisions, everyday decisions about our communities and what we want there and what needs to be there. We have to also remember that wild birds and animals are an important part of our lives and of our environment. So just like we worry about air pollution, we have to worry about, how many species are living around us, and are we providing habitats for them. That's another word that's really important when you're talking about wildlife. That's habitat. You know what habitat is, right? Okay, I see a few minor nods of the head. What's habitat?
It's an organism's surroundings.
Right. Okay, it's where you live, right? Where you live. Really, that's the simple definition, is where an organism lives is called its habitat. And an organism lives in an area, if you go to the desert, it's going to look different. The plants and animals in the desert are going to look different than plants and animals in the rainforest, for example. So animals choose a habitat. And we are living organisms, so we have a habitat too, where we live. Everybody here lives in Lewisburg? Anybody who doesn't live in Lewisburg? Westfield? Winfield? I live in Millmont. So you see, just this small group, we don't all live in the same habitat. Why do you live where you do? Did you ever think about it? I mean, that's a pretty important question, because when you strike out on your own, if you're not already, what are you going to think about? Where do I want to live? What would determine where you live? Why do you live in Lewisburg? Right, exactly. Probably most important reason is that your parents have a job here. So jobs are important in our communities, aren't they? The more jobs we have, the more stable our community is. If everybody worked in one factory, for example, and something happened that factory closed down, the town would go away, right? But if we have 12 factories and one of those factories closed up, well, we can still make it go. We only lost 1/12 of our value, or our people. There's only 1/12. We still have 11/12 left to carry on and move forward. And that's true out in the natural community. Wild birds and animals, as I say, they have jobs just like our parents do. And they do that job, and they're the only ones that can do it. They're the only ones that can do it. And the more species we have out there, the more stable the natural community is. And that's why we should be concerned, even though it's on the other side of the world, we hear about a bird or an animal that's going to become extinct or is threatened. We should be concerned about that, because it's like losing one of those laborers out there who are maintaining our environment in a healthy situation. So that's another reason, I think probably the most important reason, that wild birds and animals are important, and they're important to all of us, whether we think about them or not. So since I mentioned jobs and how important they are, every job has its special tools, don't they? You have special tools to do your job, which is school. Go to school, learn. If somebody came through the door and they had a hammer in one hand and a saw in the other and one of those nail apron things on, what would you guess they do for a living? Anybody? Everybody? Nobody. Okay. They would, I would guess that they're probably a carpenter, construction worker or something. If you saw somebody come through the door with a white coat on, one of them white jackets, and a stethoscope hanging around their neck, what would you guess they do for a living?
Yeah, Riley. Woo! What'd you say?
Okay, doctor. or somebody in the medical profession at least, right? And that's we can make those assumptions or we can make those guesses about what they do for a living based on what we see, the tools they use. And that's true of critters too. They each have this special, each species has a special job to do. To do that job, they use special tools just like us human beings. And scientists call those special tools adaptations. And the job that they do is the niche, right? They fill that particular niche in the natural community, that job that has to be done. And they're the only ones that can do it. You know, and all jobs are important. In our communities, I know some jobs seem like they're more important than others, like a doctor you think is pretty important. But you might think, well, the garbage man, he's not that important. But really, when you think about it, the garbage man is just as important as the doctor, isn't he? Because what would happen if all garbage men became extinct? What would happen? You know, the other day I was in here, and it was in the afternoon, Friday afternoon, and those people, they seem more awake than you guys.
Well, now it's a Monday, right?
I guess. But anyway.
Monday morning versus Friday.
What would happen if all garbage men became extinct? Do you think we could live as well as we do? No. Pardon me?
Do you ever drive down to Orlando in Florida? They have like these big, huge landfills. It reeks.
Well, that's true. If garbage men became extinct, we couldn't, I mean, we wouldn't, after a while, we would have all kinds of problems. So no, I guess the point I'm making is that it doesn't matter what job you do. It's important to the welfare of our whole community, no matter what you do. And that's true in the natural community, in the wild community. Each species is important because of the job that they do in the natural community. And the more species we have out there, the more species diversity is the term that they use, the more stable is the environment. So anyway, the reason I mention that is now we're going to give you some time here to go and look at these specimens with your worksheet. Brandy has some, Mrs. Spots has some worksheets, and she'll pass them out to you. And then, now this isn't a big test or anything. This is just a fun exercise. Hopefully that you'll gain some interest, even if you don't have a whole big interest in wild birds and animals. Hopefully this will kind of spark an interest in you to look at these specimens and then try and think about what they might have been, how they would use these, what tools you can recognize just on these specimens that a bird or an animal would use, and how they would use these tools. We talked about, I think the bell ringer, talked about omnivores, carnivores, herbivores, and you'll have examples of that in these things you look at. So we'll give you birds and animals, and to do that you have the big strong feet and needle-sharp claws to catch your prey and hang on to it. Then birds can fly, other animals can't, except the bat, and they don't have teeth. They have beaks, horny beaks for bills, and that's a weight-saving device. But when you're flying, you got to be light. But they tear their prey apart. They have this big hook beak, meat-eating birds, so that they can rip their prey apart and eat it. And they have these big, strong feet. The great horned owl also has a special tool that allows them to fly in almost silence. This is a great horned owl feather. If you looked at it close up here, it looks softer than those goose feathers laying over there. And if a goose flew across tree height, you would be able to hear its wings, but an owl, you wouldn't. An owl can fly in almost complete silence. And if you look at number 16 and identified it as a great horned owl, you'll know that this is also an owl because the foot and the skull look similar to the great horned owl, and it's much smaller. So this is the screech owl. This is a screech owl. And of course they do the same thing, helping to control the population of mice and everything. Those things there, I guess we didn't numbered, so I won't bother with that right now. Number 18. small and